Everyone, thanks for tuning in. In this lesson, we'll be covering the Hackerrank algorithm, migratory birds. And first things first, as always, let's dive into the problem and try to understand what we are looking for. So in this problem, this algorithm, we are provided an array, and the array has different numbers, and if we scroll down, we'll learn that each number reflects a type of bird. And there are only 5 types of bird. So the only numbers that could wind up in this array are the numbers 1 through 5. And what we want to return is the type of bird that appears the most and is the lowest number for that type of bird. So in this example, there are 2 of type 1 and 2 of type 2, and of course 1 of type 3. The highest number of times we saw a bird was twice. It happened in bird type 1 and bird type 2, and we want to return the lowest number of that type. So you'd want to return type 1. Okay, so let's head over to Replit and start to work on this. In this example, we use the example down here. So this is the array we'll be working with, and I have that copied and pasted right there. Let's dive into this. Okay, so what do we want to do? It sounds like we want to loop through this array and keep track of the number of times that a bird type appears. So a good way to do that would be to make an array. Let's call it bird count or bird counter, whatever you like. And it's going to be an array of 5 numbers with the value of 0. Because at first, before we loop through this array, we don't know how much of each kind of bird there is. And as we loop through the array, when we see bird type 1, we want to increase this value by 1. When we see bird type 2, we want to increase this value by 1. Okay, so as I said, of course, we're going to want to loop through this array. How can we loop through this? Let's write for bird in array. And let's just print bird. Let's see what we get for each bird. Okay, great. So each time we loop through this array, of course, it's going to return the next index of the array. We could actually call it bird type if you really like. That might be a little bit more clear, or if you like how most people code, you could just do n as long as you can follow that, or I, or whatever you prefer, but let's stick with bird for now. Okay, so we're getting the bird type each time we loop through. And so for bird type 1, we want to increase this value here by 1. And how would we do that? So first we'd want to, of course, get this value. And how would we get that value? It would be bird count of 0, right? Bird count index 0 is what I'm referring to. Because bird count index 0 is where the value of our bird type 1 value will be held. So how could we, in this, get bird count index 0? So if we're returning bird, we can actually do bird minus 1. So that means anytime we iterate through and we get the bird type, we will then go into our bird count array and get the index of bird minus 1. So for bird type 1, which is reflected by bird count index 0, we want to do bird minus 1. And what do we want to do to bird minus 1? We want to add 1 to it every time we see it. And that's all you'd write for that. So let's print our array that we just built, bird count, every time we iterate through, and let's see what we get. So bird type 1 appears at index 0, we increase that count. Bird type 4 appears at index 3, we increase that count. Bird type 4 appears again at index 3, we increase that count. So that's perfect. If you look at this last array, that's what that's what the value of bird count is at the end of this loop, which is what we'll be working with in the next part. So you can see here, this is perfect. Bird type 1 appears once. We know that bird type 4 will appear 3 times, and that's the value we want to capture. So how can we capture that? I'm saying we want to capture it, so that should lead you to think that there are some values that we want to store. And what we want to store is the max and the bird type. So what is the max? Max, I'm talking about the number of bird sightings. So we know that bird type 1 had 1 sighting. So through this first iteration, if we were going to loop through our new array, max would be 1. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to want to loop through this array, but we're going to loop through it a little differently. We're not going to loop through how we did here, and there's a very specific reason for that. So let's write the loop like this. For n in range 0 to 5. And so what's this going to return? If you're familiar with this kind of loop, I'm sure you're familiar with what it's going to return. Each time we loop through, n starting at 0 will increase by 1 until we get to the number just below 5, the integer just below 5. And why are we doing that? Because we want to adjust, or actually we want to get information from our bird count array at the index value of n. And what do I mean by that? I think when I write this, you'll see pretty clearly that we want our we need an if statement first. Okay, if bird count n is greater than our current max, we want to change that max to reflect the max we just encountered. So max will then equal bird count at that iteration. And we'll want to also capture the bird type. So bird type needs to change, and it will become n plus 1. And why is that? Let's see what happens. Let's print an f string. The f string will be max bird count, and we'll put max in there. Is for bird type. And let's get rid of some of these prints. Actually, let's leave that last array. We want to see that array just to keep track of what we're doing, make sure the numbers check out. Okay, so we're only now going to print these arrays, and we're going to print this new f string every time we loop through this and get something that satisfies this if statement. Okay. So what do we have here? Let's also go ahead and print n each time we loop through. Okay, so remember, this is the array that we're working with in this loop. First iteration, n will equal 0. And we go into this if statement. If bird count at index of n, which is equal to 0, is greater than max, And we've established that max is 0 here. So this satisfies that condition. Max will now become the value at bird count index 0, which is 1, and bird type, which we went over a little bit earlier, index 0 represents bird type 1. So how would we capture bird type? We would do n plus 1. So we iterate through this array the first time, max becomes 1, and bird type becomes 1. We iterate through again, n becomes 1, which will look at our array in index 1. 0 is less than our max. So that's not going to affect these values because we didn't satisfy this if statement. Go through the next iteration. N equals 2. Okay, n equals 2, which means in the index that we're checking in bird count is this third position. Index 2 is our third position. It's bird type 3. Our max is 1. Is that greater than our max? No. It's equal. So we will not capture, importantly, bird type 3. Our max will stay at 1 for bird type 1. Because remember, what is this question asking? It wants us to return the lowest numbered bird type. If we captured bird type 3 in this question and we returned our bird type at the end, it would return bird type 3, which would be incorrect. So we keep going through the loop. We iterate through. We see that our next one will be the highest max value we'll encounter in this problem. Bird count is 3 for bird type 4, and that's what we print. So at the end, we'll want to return that number, and we'll go ahead into Hackerrank and do that over here. We will return bird type. Okay, so let's remove our print statements and get this looking good for the Hackerrank input. Format's a little bit different than Replit. Oh, leave that there. That goes up, that goes up, that goes up, that goes up. Okay, I think this should suffice. Let's check it out. All right, that satisfies our sample test cases. Now let's go ahead and run it against all the test cases. And that's it. It's correct. Hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments below. I hope you like this. If you did, go ahead and hit the like button, hit subscribe. I'll be posting these every day. And if you'd like to challenge me, of course, challenge me. I love it. I love to learn. Love to learn as a community. And let's do it together. Thanks for watching.